Hello and welcome to Eco Show. This is episode number 24 and my name is Henry. This is a show about ecology, the environment, news and research in that space, and sometimes things that are unrelated, but I try to stay on topic. I usually start each episode with a animal of the week, but that's kind of devolved into being any sort of environmental thing. And then I talk about a little bit of research and then the news. So always be sure to stick around for the news, or you can skip ahead if some of the stuff is dragging on a little bit too much. So thanks for joining us this episode. I hope you enjoy. So the thing of the week this week is, and it is a thing of the week this week, is El Niño. This has been in the news a bit lately. And we've probably heard about it being talked about before, but I thought it would be good to go over just basically what it is that El Niño is. So El Niño, which means the boy in Spanish, it's been in the news, and the name comes from sailors from around Peru who noticed warm currents around the Christmas time. So the boy that El Niño is referring to is referring to little baby Jesus. And what this actually is a reoccurring but irregular warming of the ocean. So it comes consistently, but the time periods that it comes back over can be sort of random. It's in the Pacific Ocean, and it's particularly along the equator, as we'll see in a moment, in some visualizations of what it is. It has a counterpart, which is called La Niña, which we'll also show, and this is the opposite sort of reaction. So it's a cooling of ocean temperatures that is below normal, and that happens on recurring cycles, but not in a regular way. These are easy to understand if we look at the big picture. So here we've got, this is from NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Association. And we have here this image showing on the top La Niña conditions from 1998. And the area of interest is this blue patch that we can see along the equator. So if you're just listening, we have an image up of the Pacific Ocean, and it's showing ocean temperatures. And it's showing what they call a blue tongue. So that's cold temperatures that are starting around South America and moving to the west, out towards Australia and Asia. So that's La Niña, and that's irregular, cool ocean temperatures. Below that, we have an image of what normal conditions are, which shows that normally we do have cooler water around South America usually, but it's not as far extended as under La Niña conditions, and there tends to be a bit more warm water sitting out in the west around Australia and Indonesia in that area. And under El Niño conditions, the last image that we have here, there's almost a consistent warm water band that's going across the equator all the way from Australia over to South America. And so that cold tongue that comes out from South America has completely shrunken back. So we can think of this as that warm water spilling over from the west side where Australia is. And so that's what this has been in the news because most atmospheric organizations are now saying that this year is an El Nino year. And so now we're looking at some images of El Nino and what it actually does to the atmosphere. We can see in the top, we have La Nina conditions, which is that cold water coming across the equator. And again, if you're listening, there's just a rain cloud that's signifying where rain is happening at. So we can see under La Nina conditions, rain is being pushed over to the west. So over around Australia. And under normal conditions, just below that, rain is a little bit more to the middle, to the center. And then under El Nino conditions, that heat from the Pacific Ocean is more central in the Pacific, and you have rain even further over to the east where the US and things like that are. So wherever you have this warming, evaporation and rain occurring. And when we look at what these expected impacts are globally, we can see that, and these are projections, that under El Nino, we have projected wet weather for the southern United States, wet and cold. And we have a lot of wet and warm weather all through the equator. And then we have a lot of dry and hot weather going on over in the west. So over around Australia in El Nino years, we can get a lot of dry and warm weather going on because that rain is sort of shifted more back over to the US with that heat. And in particular, L19, 2019 was considered to be an El Nino year, but a relatively weak El Nino year. And there were a lot of fires in Australia that year that are likely associated with it due to that drying and hot weather that came with El Nino. Also, 2019 was the hottest global year on record, which is attributed to it being an El Nino year that year. And this year is projected to be a strong El Nino, which means that there's a lot of high temperatures in the ocean. So it's being projected that it's going to be very hot temperatures this year. Let's see. And I think that's about it. So that's all of our El Nino. So when people are talking about El Nino, they're basically just talking about warming ocean temperatures, and that tends to have drying conditions over in Australia and over in that area, and a bit wetter conditions over in the US, but that can be exacerbated or changed in different ways. So it can be different from that in reality, but that's what the projections are pointing towards for that sort of an event. And La Nina, which tends to follow El Ninos, is the opposite of that, where the ocean gets cooler. Our research this week, we just have a short research article, and the research article is about plants and touch. So at Washington State University, they found that plants can sense touch. They know when they're touched as well as when they're let go. They found that plant cells responded to a fine glass rod which touched on it, and when they were touched by this glass rod, they sent calcium signals to other cells. sent calcium to other cells, and when they were released, those waves of calcium were more rapid. So humans have nerves which transmit messages to our brains, and plants have very rigid cells. So it's the pressure they're suggesting that causes them to notice that a touch is being initiated and let go. And that's really all that article was pointing out, is that plants can sense touch. So that was just kind of a interesting thing to know. So be gentle with your plants, give them some nice touch. And the touch can, even brushing has been shown to initiate these changes. And so this touch can lead to downstream gene activation in plants for different reasons. So there'll be ongoing research, I'm sure, to look at what it is that touch initiates in plants downstream. Now we are moving right along onto the news. So we're moving and grooving today. We're going to start with some ecosystem related news. And the first ecosystem related news is that there is a big coral restoration project going on in Hawaii. This project is called Akoakoa. And what it means is it means to assemble. It also means coral. So this project has been funded by some big donations, several $1 million of donations. The idea is to combine work in water and on land to restore coral. It's going to start on the west side of the big island of Hawaii, which has a lot of coral and is a big source of interest for people to go and check out. And it's over 120 miles of reef. We looked at a research article a little while back now that was talking about coral reefs and how there's this unfortunate cycle where the most popular coral reefs tend to get the most attention and the most people visiting them. And when you have people visiting them, you're going to have people touching, even accidentally on coral reef, touching them. And things like sunscreen have chemicals in them that are bad for corals. And they found in this research that people who are going and being around these popular sites have a bit of degradation going on. And that whole west side of the big island is a big popular coral spot. So hopefully this will have some big impacts. And such a big impact on coral reef does come from the land, from pollution coming off as well. So this is sounding like a cool project. And so much of that work to protect coral does come from the land, especially because from engines and energy generation, we release a lot of carbon dioxide into the air, and the oceans absorb that carbon dioxide. And it makes oceans more acidic as well. They're absorbing that. And in lots of cases, that those more acidic conditions make coral break down, as well as those more warm conditions that are coming from climate change can lead to coral die-offs. So protecting coral reefs is a lot more than just planting new coral. It's also about creating conditions that are sustainable into the future in the ocean for coral, which means reducing the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Because of that relationship between the ocean and the atmosphere, there's carbon dioxide being stored in both of them, and a lot in the ocean. Okay, Our next piece of news, which is still ecosystem related, is about financial incentives for reforestation, particularly in Costa Rica and Guatemala. There are programs there that pay people to restore forests. They have been pretty successful, especially in Costa Rica. They have led from large-scale deforestation to large-scale reforestation. This is through the government. People are paid a fixed amount of money, so there's no surprises from year to year. And people are paid by taxes that are put on fossil fuels and the use of water as well, fees that are put on using water. And we have an image here of forest cover in Costa Rica, and we can see in the 1940s we had 75% forest cover, 1950s 72%, 1960s it drops to 53%. So that's only in 10 years there was a drop of 20% in the forest cover. In the 70s, forest cover dropped to 31%. And then wardrobe change. All right, if you're just listening, then nothing strange will have just happened, but I just recorded the rest of the episode, but it turned out I was out of memory on my phone. So I'm having to, it wasn't a whole lot that I lost out on, but here we are. I'm back at it. I'm doing this again. This is deja vu for me, but not for you. So wrapping that up, I was talking about forest cover over Costa Rica. And let's see, I was talking about the amount that was being lost, I believe. So essentially from 1940 to the 1980s, you had a loss of about 50% of the forest. And then from that period, you had the forest cover increasing. So from the 80s to 2010, you had an increase in about 30% of forest. So this program has been attributed with success in reforestation due to these financial incentives. And Guatemala is doing an interesting thing with this where they aren't necessarily requiring you to show proof of living on a particular area of land to get payments to do this, which may sound like it would be open to issues being created, but because of so much civil war strife related issues there, they found that seems to work in that space. And the way that they're paying for this, I am not sure if I said, but it's by taxes on fossil fuels and water use. And they're looking to develop ways to do this, to continue to do this as energy sources become more renewable. Yep, that's what's going on there with that article. I think that was about it. So very cool to hear that reforestation is happening on a big scale in that place. I actually want to read up on that and see how they did that, if it was a lot of planting or if they just let that regeneration happen, because that's a lot of forest to come back in such a short amount of time. Our next news article, and these are, now we've got some climate kind of related, climate / energy company related stuff. An Italian oil company was sued. I made the joke last time, and I'll make it again, is that no, this is not an olive oil company. It's an oil and gas company. It's called Eni, ENI, and it is being sued by 4 NGOs. They are suing Eni for contributing to climate change. This lawsuit filed claims about Eni's extraction and production, and that claiming that they cause significant damage. This is a big deal because it's the first time a company is being sued in Italy for climate related things. Major points of their claims is that any extracted fossil fuels that release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, contributing to climate change, that they failed to mitigate these impacts by things like renewable investment, and that they actively lobbied against climate policy. So the major points: they contributed to climate change, they didn't do anything to stop or mitigate it, and they actively prevented anybody else from doing anything about it as well. There's a part of a growing wave of international lawsuits against oil companies. So many places will be looking to see how this moves forward. There are a few other oil companies under litigation at the moment. There's a documentary on PBS called The Power of Big Oil that talks about Mobil Oil, the oil company, and what they've done through time to first understand the impacts of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So since about the 70s, they've known about the impacts of carbon dioxide on the atmosphere, and they have been lobbying against action ever since then. We'll see how this goes, and we'll keep an eye on that. I'll report back if I hear anything about that lawsuit. Our next article is that there's a new EPA rule which will cut carbon emissions from power plants by 30%. So it will require power plants to reduce their carbon emissions by 30%. This is essentially forcing them to develop and implement carbon capture tools or to invest in renewable energy. It's estimated this will save $100 billion in climate and public health. The public health aspect of this is because a lot of these power plants are combusting oil to produce energy and are releasing harmful chemicals into local communities. The EPA has been pretty dragged down in terms of the power that has to implement changes, so I was pretty surprised to see that they're going to be trying to implement this. I'm sure it will be challenged, and I'm not sure how lasting it will be, but if you can get these companies to reduce their carbon emissions by 30%, that would be pretty impressive. And I imagine once they had done that, well, it's hard to know what these companies will do because they're beholden to shareholders, so they might reverse it as well. But if you're able to get this to go forward, that would be pretty cool. Okay, our next and last piece of news is that carbon dioxide, yes, the gas that we've been talking about today, is being looked at to be used as feed for animals. So if we eat a lot of meat around the world, and those things that we eat need to eat a lot of things like corn and soy to get up to weight quickly to be sold at market. And the production of things like corn and soy usually is done in monocrops. There's lots of fertilizers and pesticides being used for things like soy. There's a lot of deforestation that happens in order to be able to plant soy. So there's a lot of issues with how much corn and soy we need to produce to grow all these animals. That's why there's this research looking into if you can make feed, so food for these animals, from carbon dioxide as a synthetic nutrition. And what's been done is that carbon dioxide was captured and combined with hydrogen to make methanol. This was all done using wind and solar. So this has been done before, but this is being done now in a way that's meant to be self-sustaining. Enzymes are then applied to that methanol, and you can get, I think it was L-alanine from that, which is an amino acid used to make proteins, and it can be used as food source itself. This is part of a wider push to sustainably produce feed. They've synthetically made starches before, and this is a curious thing to do. A while back there was articles about meat being synthesized in labs, and this is not particularly the same because this is a bit of a chemical process rather than, I guess, growing meat tissue. And it's a very interesting thing to do, but it decouples, which just means it's detaching our food system from actually the earth in a lot of ways. It's attaching it to the atmosphere, I guess, but it does make me feel uneasy when you're hearing about these things, because I think we should be able to operate in a way with what we have that can be sustained on its own. But this is a cool thing, but that's probably just me being, hearing about a new thing and being freaked out about it. But the thing I was thinking is that this would be really cool I don't want this to be on Earth. Even though I would try it, I would probably eat it because I would eat everything. But what this does make sense for is for space travel and things like that. So I could see people having a little food machine up in space, and you could, have be capturing your own carbon dioxide and making it into food and things like that. That could be pretty cool. Anywho, yeah, so they're trying to do that. We may have some sustainable feeds. It would be cool to have less deforestation going on to make soybean fields and less monocrops of food to be getting produced for all of these animals. But it's one of those things where the problem seems like it's not necessarily to focus on feeding all these animals. Doesn't feel like the right space as much as why have we gotten to this point where we need to be growing all of these animals. Anywho, that's the last article for this week. Hopefully this recorded this time, and I hope your week is going well, or your weekend is going well, and I hope all of that continues to go well. And thank you for checking in. We'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.